Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. We'll make a start if that's okay. And thank you all very much for coming along this evening. We're delighted to have Christine Gilbert with us. Christine and I had a chat about 6 months ago, and she intimated to me back then that she was perhaps going to be stepping down in June, and I thought it would be a great idea to have her along here at the end of June just to speak to us. She won't know this, but in a way she's repaying me a favour by being here tonight. A year ago I was in Cornwall giving a speech to 100 primary school head teachers, and there was a gentleman there from Ofsted, and the gentleman from Ofsted got up and of course he drew some flack from the primary school head teachers. But when I got up and I spoke on the importance of keeping SATs in the primary education system, I think he was Mother Teresa compared to me. Christine has had a career which has spanned across the field of education. Prior to Ofsted, she taught history, becoming head of Whitmore High School, I believe, when she was just 32. She then followed it up with a time as Director of Education with Harrow. And since becoming Chief Inspector at Ofsted back in October '06, Christine has guided it through a number of key developments. She's an advocate of progressive change, and it's fair to say that she's steered it through some major challenges over the past 5 years, and I think it's emerged stronger as a result. But the state of our education system across the country remains acute. Achievement is still no better than satisfactory in 40% of our schools, and Ofsted have a key role to play in improving our schools. They're already running the new inspection framework in 150 pilot schools, and we're delighted to have her here tonight. We look forward to hearing what she has to say. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here. When we spoke about this, it seemed a really great idea at the time, but I go next Thursday, and if I tell you I was going through this at 3 o'clock this afternoon, remembering the words of my history tutor at university saying, "Take out the bit you like the best, Christine." And so it's just under 40 minutes. I'm going to James paled at that, and he said, "Could you make it 30?" So I'm going to talk quickly. I'm going to try and keep to the script, which I always find really hard. But let me just begin. I thought it was a really good time to talk about school inspection with the bill going through Parliament. It's also timely, I think, for me to reflect on my time as Chief Inspector, but also on Ofsted. It's almost 20 years since Ofsted was established. So I thought those two things, and before I pass on responsibility to whoever comes next. I also thought it was important just to reflect on the role of school inspection as it refocuses much more on teaching and its impact on learning. A role really central, as you know, to the agenda of the coalition. Now, we refocused our inspection framework back in 2009 with a much tighter focus on teaching and learning, but this one is going to go further still, and you might want to pick up some of that in the discussion. Now, Ofsted's first set of inspection arrangements were, as I said, devised 20 years ago in what became the 1992 School Inspections Act, and they'd been revised periodically ever since, usually after a change of government or after a change of Secretary of State. And Ofsted, of course, wasn't the first school inspectorate. The inspection of schools, or probably more accurately, the inspection of teachers, isn't new in England. There's a real tradition of it going back to the 19th century. And certainly I remember when I was teaching, glimpsing HMI coming into the schools. This was an HMI part of the department. One never came into my lesson, but you knew somebody important was in school. You usually saw a man in a very smart suit who spent some time with the head. I once saw a woman with a hat. I'm too young to remember the glove stage, but I was there at the hat stage. And they were very important people, but I was never sure what they did. But they'd been inspecting schools. HMI had been inspecting schools since 1847. John Dunford, until really recently the General Secretary of ASCL, the Association of School and College Leaders, when I became Chief Inspector, he sent me the book he'd written He said he had quite a few that had been remaindered, and gave me one, which I read over that summer. And it was, or to me anyway, at that stage, a very entertaining read. And he talked about a period at the beginning of the 20th century when there was a purge at HMI, led by Robert Morant, a permanent secretary at the Board of Education. He wanted to recruit new, young, flexible inspectors, and was really not very generous about those that they were going to replace. I just thought I'd give you a couple of examples. So he observed, there's some union colleagues in the audience, and I thought they'd enjoy these and see how things had improved. Morant observed, Mr. Danby has been 33 years in service, doing the same thing in the same way and always ineffectively, without energy and frequently absent. Mr. Aldis HMI was notorious as a fool, inconceivably futile and worse than useless. Mr. Lee has sunk so deep into a rut that he will never again see over the edge, nor is able to do anything definite either in this rut or in any other rut. You can see why he was the permanent secretary. And my favourite, Mr. Morgan Owen HMI, is wholly without breeding or feelings. He's been tried in one place after another with the same disastrous results. So the permanent secretary has obviously not been on one of Ofsted's how to do sensitive and supportive feedback courses. But no matter how good Morant's recruits, there was a problem essentially with the school system and inspection. What went on behind the school gates, often closed gates, was a real mystery. And the public, and parents in particular, knew very little about what really went on in our schools. You know, as a young teacher, I got through probation year, nobody coming near me. Well, the head once collected some textbooks from the stock cupboard at the back, and that meant I got through my inspection because children were sitting in chairs and behind desks. But it was a really very different system from the system that we've got now. HMI did inspect schools, but the hit rate, as it was described, was something like one school in every 25 years. And the reports were confidential to the head and the governors. So we didn't know where our best schools were or what they were doing. Even more worryingly, we didn't know where our worst schools were or what they were doing. So it really isn't surprising that if you move on 75 years or so, by the mid-70s, there was a growing unease about the quality of education. Some of you in the room can remember, as I do, Callaghan's speech when he hit a nerve at Ruskin College. He described the curriculum in primary schools as being a secret garden, do you recall that? And the preserve of the teaching profession. Parents didn't know, he said, how good their child's school was, neither did taxpayers or policymakers. It is worth remembering all of that when we talk about school accountability today, I think. Now, it was going to be another 12 years after that speech before a national curriculum and regular testing were introduced, and they were followed by the inspection system we have today. And Ofsted was created, lots of people have forgotten this, on the back of the Citizens' Charter, John Major's Citizens' Charter. And that was intended to provide up-to-date information about schools for those who use them. Primarily, the focus was reports for parents, but children and their families were really part of that debate. Okay, so what's happened in the years since 1992? I want to touch just very briefly on a more basic question. You know, what is Ofsted for? Now, the select committees, the education select committee's recent report on the work of Ofsted suggested that there's still uncertainty about our purpose, though I think there's far less confusion about what we actually do. So the things that we do, we inspect, and the HMI mantra is still, without fear or favour. We inspect childcare and early years, schools, a whole range of children's services, children's social care included in that, and a wide range of services related to further education and training, initial teacher education and adult education. That's the first thing. The second thing I think is terrifically important too. It sets out expectations of what good practice looks like in clear frameworks, which is why it's really important for us to get those frameworks as right as we can. They set out in detail how we will inspect particular settings or services and how we're going to make our judgments. The third thing is that we put all procedures and findings into the public domain. The reports are really widely consulted, parents looking for schools, childcare provision, estate agents looking at our reports, houses advertised with reference to Ofsted and so on. Government bodies use the report, local authorities use, a whole host of people use our reports. The fourth area, a wealth of thematic reports, we call them surveys, on different issues of national interest. So this week, I think it was, we looked at alternative provision, what was going on with that up and down the country. On Friday that we're doing something on publishing report on sport. And we advise ministers on the state of education, children's services and skills and the feasibility and effect of their policy. So that's what we do, but there's far less agreement, I think, on Ofsted's on values and on perceptions of our purpose, I think, depend on who you're talking to. But in my last annual report, I said, the core purpose of inspection has not changed. Ofsted seeks to report candidly on the quality of services so that an informed choice can be made both by those who use them and those who fund them. And the second element, inspection should also enable the services to improve so that the life chances of children, young people and adults are enhanced. So with that in mind, I'd like to just quickly review Ofsted's life across almost 20 years and finish by reflecting on the challenges for Ofsted in the future. Now, Ofsted's birth, let's look at 91 to 2000, because the work started before 1992. So the birth of Ofsted it involved disestablishing Majesty's Inspectorate HMI, which was then part of the DFE. It was seen as part of a really cosy professional establishment, the education establishment, and it created in its place was an arm's-length non-ministerial government department with responsibility for outsourcing the inspection of schools, because it's not written down, but there was real suspicion of HMI and a feeling that they couldn't do the job that was needing to be done. And Kenneth Clarke, then Education Secretary, his purpose in doing this was he aimed to ensure greater independence of advice to ministers, this is what he said, as well as the inspection of every school at least once during a pupil's time in it. So I think Ofsted's birth did open a secret garden in which too much of education had been conducted. It was at the time, there was a really powerful sense supported by testing, national curriculum, greater parental choice, league tables, and that went through successive governments actually, that public services should be much more open to public scrutiny. So within just 5 years of the creation of Ofsted, inspection reports on every English school have been written, discussed with schools, and importantly sent to parents and published. Their publication, I think, did start to change how schools worked. There was a challenge to inner city schools that were failing working class youngsters, and also a challenge to apparently successful schools in leafy suburbs that were coasting. This was, I think, sometimes really painful for teachers and alarming for children and parents, but for the first time, the country, many local authorities knew where the problems lay, and as important, knew that they had to tackle them. I just left headship at the time to work in a local authority, and I absolutely know that pupils were the real beneficiaries of that, and I felt that way before I ever applied for this post. So the inspectors, and this is the bit that sounds dull, but I think is absolutely crucial. The inspectors used an inspection framework. It's the first time this was done. This gave them the guidance and criteria that they needed to make judgments on schools. So the first time, the criteria by which schools were to be judged were published. For the first time, inspectors were routinely opening classroom doors and observing teaching. And though inspectors made no bones about the importance of testing and exams and so on, they also made it really clear what they were looking at and looking for was good teaching and leadership. And that framework was the basis for training thousands of independent inspectors and for entering into contracts with initially, I'm told, about 250 independent inspection providers. I just had a quick word with somebody at the beginning who was one of those providers. Now, contracted out inspection remains the basis for the school inspection system today, and in fact we've also just now, at the beginning of the year, last September, outsourced early years too. But now in the schools and college sector, we have just 3 contractors. And certainly, when I first arrived at Ofsted, the more I found out about it, it made me see that it's one of the most impressive public-private partnerships around. The contract for schools and colleges is about 220 million. So benchmarks, expectations were provided by these frameworks, and in its day this was really, really radical. So they were saying, what were the features of a good or an excellent school? How would we know if a school were failing to provide an adequate standard of education? And so the advantages of that openness were that expectations were clear to all involved. There was discussion about that. And as you tell me all of the time, if Ofsted says they're going to look at it, that's what we'll do. That's what we'll have to do in schools. That's why it's so important that we're looking at the right things and thinking about the right things. But even with my praise of these frameworks, I would add one really important caveat. I do think the framework should be sufficiently loosely woven and intelligently applied to allow for innovation and even unorthodoxy to be recognised and valued, and we do see that up and down the country. Now, those early Ofsted reports were particularly critical of much of the teaching of literacy and numeracy, and that finding was echoed in the first national primary school test results. And you can see the drift of what I'm saying. The reshaping of initial teacher education emerged from that with a focus on teaching and learning, the development of what became the National Literacy and Numeracy Strategies, and the establishment of, say, the National College for School Leadership. All of these things came out of some of those reports. The floor targets announced by Michael Gove last week had their origins in floor targets first introduced by David Blunkett in 2000. I didn't know, David, that you were coming. That was actually in the speech already. The combination of accountability, I think, and challenging minimum standards has been a powerful driver for improvement, backed, I think, by an ever more ambitious set of inspection expectations. Now, when Tony Blair became Prime Minister in 1997 with his 3 priorities of education, 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 Sir Chris Woodhead was still at the helm of Ofsted, and Ofsted graduated from being an abbreviation in the Oxford English Dictionary to general usage as a noun, as a verb, and sometimes, often actually, as an expletive. But the basic groundwork and the expectations established then, I think, were a really essential part of the improvements that followed. And certainly, Chris Woodhead never claimed that inspection should be a comfortable experience, and he put it as, he said he was paid to challenge mediocrity. And I hope I don't upset too many of you here if I tell you I absolutely agree that that's a key role of this job. At the time he was Chief Inspector, I was Director of Education in Tower Hamlets and then moved on to Chief Executive there, and that borough was transforming itself from one of London's lowest education achievers to one of the best in its primary school results. And I will argue till my dying day that the literacy and numeracy strategies introduced in 1996-97 were absolutely fundamental to what happened there. Tolerance and mediocrity would never have delivered the success that we saw there and is still seeing as those children move through secondary schools. Okay, so the second decade of that, the new millennium actually saw Ofsted take its first step into proportionality. The 2000 framework for schools introduced shorter inspection for the best performing 25% of schools and full inspections every 4 years for the rest. Proportionality, what used to be called intervention in inverse proportion to success, has been a real byword, I think, of inspections since, with the latest legislation effectively ending regular inspection for those deemed outstanding. And I really do want to inject a note of caution here, and I've said this certainly at the Select Committee. Schools do slip back, and my annual report last year showed that 43% of schools that were previously outstanding had a less favourable judgment when inspected in 2009-10. Now, the framework was probably tougher, but nevertheless, that's a real shift. I also think this is a danger, that people outside won't worry about this, but I worry about it, that inspectors will not see enough excellent schools to know how good others can be. And of course, we're developing more triggers, particularly, I think, parental feedback, to inspect, which help us to tell us whether we should inspect such schools. I'm sure too that many will want to request inspections after a time to revalidate the earlier judgments, and my guess is that parents, or pressure from parents, will encourage them to do that. But I hope this position is really kept under review to ensure it has got the system-wide benefits we all hope for. Okay, 3 major changes have transformed our work in recent years. Now, the first was the Green Paper, Every Child Matters, the Children Act 2004, and the inspection of outcomes for children, that package of things. Now, the focus on children's care, well-being and safety was driven by really horrendous cases of child neglect and abuse, and that's where the Act and the ECM stemmed from. And at that stage, Ofsted took charge of children's residential care and welfare, local authority provision for children's services, and the consequential incorporation of the outcomes for children in all relevant inspection and regulatory frameworks. So that fed into all that we were doing. I believe very strongly that inspection is there to support improvement, but it also can check compliance, but it can never eradicate. It can reduce the risk to children and young people, but it can't ultimately ensure their safety any more than inspection teaches children to read. Now, it is arguable, I think, that inspecting all of those outcomes for children in an increasingly proportionate approach to inspection detracts from the inspection of a school's core business, and that was the basis of the reference in the white paper, and the current education bill really does seek to redress that balance. A second substantial change was the improvement of self-evaluation and intelligent use of data. From 2000, Ofsted introduced, initially apparently on a trial basis, but then throughout all inspections, an opportunity for schools to give an account of their own quality through self-evaluation, and they graded themselves against the criteria that inspectors would use. This led to the development of the SEF, self-evaluation forms, which I think, after years of fairly unproductive approaches to school review, really put self-evaluation on the map. And from being the weakest part of school leadership, that's what the evidence showed for years before that, self-evaluation became, in the course of a few years, one of the strongest. And I do think Ofsted established the importance of objective data as a way to identify and analyse the quality of the outcomes of education. We had PINDAS, PANDAS, PIXIES, and we've got RAISE online today, but whatever the acronym, schools now use data much more intelligently to help track progress. It's very rare to not see this in school, to track pupil progress, set individual targets, challenge poor performance, and most important of all, give appropriate support. Now, data focused the minds of inspectors on absolute and relative performance, but it didn't mean, and it doesn't mean, that Ofsted didn't recognise the degree of challenge faced by pupils and schools according to their circumstances. And for most pupils, if not all, what happens beyond the school gate has a major impact on what happens inside the school gate. Ofsted did pioneer the use of measures of progress by presenting value-added data, and that did enable some analysis of how particular pupils or groups of pupils are doing compared with peers in their other schools. That didn't mean that disadvantage became an excuse for poor performance, though I never ever underestimate the challenges that poverty can bring for pupils, for families and for schools. Now, the third and most dramatic change was the establishment of Ofsted as a result of the Education and Inspections Act, and that's where I came in. In 2006, the Office of the Majesty's Chief Inspector of Schools became the Office for Standards in Education, Children's Services and Skills. I always have to read that because it's really hard to remember the title. Now, it wasn't an executive agency, but something called a body corporate working for the Crown. But we were nevertheless still Ofsted. There was a debate apparently about the name. The name was kept. And it's been my privilege and also my challenge to manage an expanding remit which included childcare in early years, education and children's social care, further education, local authority children's services and CAFCAS. But I think we absolutely have been tested in this, but I think it has shown some versatility and resilience. I think despite the criticisms made us too big, there have been many successes, and I think the rationale for a more holistic Ofsted has been the interconnectedness, if you like, of different aspects of education and children's services and children's lives. It's pulling those things together to get a pattern of the experience of the child and the support that that child needs at different stages. So it's not different inspectors looking at different bits and writing different reports. And while it has taken, and still takes actually, time to incorporate the different disciplines and traditions into Ofsted, I think we are achieving it, and we have a picture now of young children's lives and their services, particularly where they affect the most disadvantaged. That picture really means that the provision for those gives us a base to have a stronger provision for them, and I think it will become stronger in the thematic reports that we produce in the years to come. Looking now, and as we've done that, we have focused on our own improvement. Beginning, I used to say, if I was talking about the Ofsted, that Ofsted touches the lives of at least a third of the population, or a third, probably near a half. And it took me about a year to realise that that was frightening people with us. And it also made me see, as inspectors, when Ofsted was so educationally associated with education in schools, that people were surprised when specialists in children's social care, in FE and so on, came in to inspect them. So we really refocused the language that we've been using and the way that we're talking about what we're doing. We have specialists still doing specialist inspections, but it's the overall holistic picture that we get our children and their lives, and the experience that they're having is crucial to the new Ofsted. I think as we move into this last decade, to the third decade of Ofsted's existence, it's worth, so from now on, if you like, it's worth thinking not just about the new school framework and its impact, but also about issues where I think, whether we do it or somebody else, but more work is needed. So if I'm candid, I don't think inspection has, or certainly Ofsted inspection, has never succeeded in making strong judgments about use of resources and value for money. Yet I really do think increasing school autonomy raises the need for greater financial accountability, which goes beyond annual audit. But in terms of inspection that we are focused on, I think there's three key challenges. The first is to ensure it remains fit for purpose by applying it intelligently to the changing face of education and other public services, to maximise its contribution to improvement, and to ground it in the needs of children, young people and learners. Now, the first of these, I do think inspection needs to find an appropriate response to the really far-ranging changes in the provision of education. I think there are real tensions, and we have to find a way of responding to the real shift in the landscape that we're going to be seeing. So the promotion of further degrees of school autonomy, together with free schools, academies, federations, chains and other groups of schools, raises again the question of how they're to be inspected. Now, parents in the main see only the individual provider, the school, the childcare, the nursery, whatever it is. However, I do really think we've got to get the measure of whether federations and chains are providing the quality, the sustainability and added value that's being suggested. There are really different models around. Some are loose, some are hard. Which model is most successful, for example? It's really important, I think, that we learn lessons from the experiences of these organisations. And I think the way ahead is likely to evolve for inspection, looking at the whole through the effectiveness of its part. But there is a problem if some of those parts remain inaccessible because they're exempt from inspection. Now, it may be that our thematic surveys approach, that what we do there may be adaptable for this type of purpose. And I would say, I almost took this out, but if you look at beyond the next few years, I do begin to wonder much more radically and very speculatively whether inspection could ever become a wholly commercial, contractual agreement. I think that is a point for discussion, but probably for a different evening. The second challenge is how inspection can best support school improvement. And I said in my last report, I see Ofsted setting expectations of good practice in clear frameworks, undertaking independent, evidence-based inspection with well-crafted recommendations for better practice, and identifying good practice and disseminating what can be learned or transferred. Now, the new schools framework really seeks to keep pace with inspection evidence and the best research into school effectiveness. So inspectors will want to see really effective formative assessment of pupils' progress, identifying what they're finding difficult and where the barriers lie, helping them to identify, this is how the extent to which teaching helps this, helping them to identify how to improve and what they need to do to make progress. Inspectors will be looking for feedback to what students ask and say, and the extent to which the teacher can adapt to that information. And for me, that's really about perceptive teaching, reflective teaching. I therefore expect to see a greater focus in our reports on teacher development. The new reports, I hope, will tell the story, unless they change it after I've gone. The new reports will tell the story of each school's improvement journey. So the section on leadership and management will capture the story of that school, picking up on what the schools themselves consider to be the key levers for effective change. I also think we've got work to do on making our reports as readable and as accessible as possible. So essentially what I'm saying is it's a real myth that Ofsted doesn't support improvement. I think we're really well placed to promote improvement, but inspection by itself couldn't bring about any improvement at all. Improvements brought about by those working in the education, care and skills sectors, and it ultimately depends on the actions, for example, of individual childminders, teachers, lecturers, social workers and those who lead them. But we can act, I think, as a catalyst or a support for improvement. It can confirm a direction of travel, and the overview provided by the school's own self-evaluation. It provides an external evaluation of what goes on, and if necessary, it doesn't just hold the institutions and services to account. It really demands improvement and takes action if improvement doesn't occur or occurs too slowly. Head teachers tell me that inspection recommendations, and they don't just tell me, they tell the NFER too, are built into schools action planning. And inspectors now, since 2009, really spend quite a time discussing the findings with school leaders and governors so they can focus effort where it's most needed. And they sit in now with the inspectors to hear how the judgments are made. And where schools are failing, regular monitoring with considerable encouragement and advice is a key part of the journey to failure to success. Now, I think as the onus for school improvement shifts from local authorities and national strategies to schools and schools partnerships, including teaching schools, it's important that Ofsted is able to support the work of those partnerships through incisive inspection findings at the right time and to evaluate the impact of this systemic approach to school improvement. I think we can do, and that there isn't time to discuss this tonight, but it's an important point, as Steve Mumby made it last week. We can support improvement too with greater use of our rich resource base. You can glimpse now just a bit of its potential if you view the best practice website that we launched a few months ago. Many individual researchers from home, abroad, and many research institutions do use our database, but its potential is absolutely used, and we want to go further and faster so that it's used more than it is now. The third challenge is grounding inspection in the needs, the interests and voices of people who use the services we inspect. Children and young people, parents and carers, adult learners and employers. We've got to focus, I think, on the detail, on the precision, the forensic analysis of frontline practice, be that social care or teaching. And when really hard decisions, as they are being made at the moment, need to be made about the deployment of finite resources, I would have absolutely no hesitation in championing those for whom life, and prioritising those for whom life is an uphill struggle, especially those at most risk of harm or failure. Too often I think they rely on poor services and they need Ofsted to say so. Now, they may be children and young people in the care of a local authority, They may have special needs or struggle with the use of English. They might be marginalised in their communities or being convicted of criminal activity. But when I look at what's happening with looked after children, the gap is really still widening between their achievements and those of the rest. And they're still much more likely to go to prison than they are university. So it's absolutely fundamentally important, not just to the individuals, but to the way we work as society, that our expectations are higher for those children and we support them to achieve what they should be achieving. Now, improving doesn't just mean improving their home environment or teaching them to read. If you look at our evidence, looking holistically across the piece, their lives are so dysfunctional that actually every bit of support that they receive has to be of good quality for them to really succeed. And we are getting there. The Association of Directors of Children's Services, who haven't always been massively positive about us, recently said that Ofsted inspections of looked after children are really putting those children at the forefront of what local authorities are doing. I do think it's important that increased autonomy doesn't increase the gap between the most and least effective schools. The Secretary of State has set ambitious targets to raise the standards of the weakest performers, and it's important that strong school-driven system leadership is harnessed to narrow attainment gaps. The good thing, I think, is that we do know how to make every school a good school, and Ofsted's Outstanding Schools series has set that out clearly. The depressing thing is that these lessons still need to be systemically and universally applied. Where inspection of the future is drawing from the past, I think it's important to, as I said, to reassert the need for real focus on observation at the front line. Too many outstanding schools, James said in the introduction, have teaching and learning that's good but not excellent. Excellent leadership needs to be reflected in the staff room and the classroom, and I think in the coming years Ofsted will continue to be at the forefront of responding to those challenges. So it isn't just the satisfactory schools that James referred to, it's moving others too. So before I finish, let me just say something about the inspection itself. So some who contributed evidence to the Select Committee bemoaned a lack of what's called recent field experience of many inspectors. And I think they forget our best inspectors are not necessarily those that have just come in from schools. I think that people do forget that inspection is a craft in itself, for which quite a long apprenticeship is sometimes needed, together with a relevant professional background. And a former senior chief inspector, not of Ofsted but an HMI, Sheila Brown, wrote back in 1979, "There's never been a rigid definition of inspection, though there have been and still are conventions, instructions and guidelines." She continued, "The basic principle has always been close observation, exercised with an open mind by persons with appropriate experience and a framework of relevant principles." So in my view, that's really stood the test of time. Ofsted inspectors have spent 20 years observing, reporting, revealing truths that have helped improve both the quality and, I think, the expectations of our education and children's services systems. I do feel privileged to have played my part, and I'm confident that the new framework that my successor will implement, I hope, will extend and build upon that record. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Christine. That was a really comprehensive and engaging summary, I think, of where Ofsted has come from and where you see it going, and really quite remarkable to me just when you point out the number of people, the number of lives in the country that Ofsted does touch. We're going to take some time now for questions, 15 minutes or so, so please do direct questions to myself and we'll answer them from the floor. Thanks. Elaine.
Hi, oh, thank you.
Just sorry, if you could just say who you are, where you're from, please.
Elaine Simpson from Serco. Very much welcome the points you made around the role of Ofsted in terms of supporting improvement, and particularly the best practice website and some of the changes there. But for me, one of the most frustrating things remains that there's just such a wealth of amazing data already sitting there in all of those inspection reports. And I think there are things that need to be done very quickly, just to put a flag by superb practice, a little flag. Because the problem is that, albeit the school's journey will be a very important part of the framework going forward, actually you've got an awful lot of outstanding schools there who've got spectacular journeys, and we'll never find a way to search and grab that unless we actually do something quite radical about the way we're recording that data and just flagging it. And it's frustrating in a sense, because I think Ofsted does a fantastic job in terms of capturing all of that stuff and brings a rigour and a focus that people respect hugely. They might not always like it, but they always respect it. But somehow we're not capturing it in quite the way we need to. And we need something, I think, that retrospectively will look at all that data.
The resource is phenomenal, but that's also part of the issue. And you need to know the questions that you're asking of the data. So the best practice website that we've established isn't just flagging something. Things are identified. They probably go through 3 different ways of checking before they go on to the website, and then going to stay on for a year and so on. And they're managed in that way. But I think there is more that we can do there, but there is more too. It was going to be done before the end of June, but I heard last week it isn't. The website, the new website, will give people far better access to a whole host of things than what exists now. But I have been saying that at meetings like this for 18 months. And I was promised it's a farewell gift, but for all sorts of reasons, it's not happened. But that will happen. But I don't think it is just a question of collating things. I mean, what I'd really like people to do is to be using it and asking questions of it. And the work that we've done, probably over the 2 or 3 years, which is essentially very boring technical work, will allow people to access it more than we do. Because I think in terms of our reports, our thematic reports are quite costly, because we go into schools to look at, we can still go into schools, but I think we can do more with what's described as retrieval, looking at the evidence that we've got to find different things. So I think the issue is asking the right questions and presenting the data in a way that's meaningful to people, not just drowning people in it.
Gentleman at the back, and then the lady over in this corner after that. So we could take the 2 questions and then Christina will respond to those.
Thank you very much for your remarks, Christine. I found them extremely thoughtful, thought-provoking and informative too. Just in terms of your remarks on the importance of teacher development, you talked about the importance of Ofsted focusing on the perceptive and reflective aspects of teaching, and I think that's really, really important. Sorry, I didn't introduce myself. Patrick Roach from the NASUW Teachers Union. Perceptive and reflective aspects of teaching should be an important focus for inspection. I just would like to know a little bit more from you in terms of your thoughts around that, and particularly the implications of that for inspection practice. Because we believe, as a union, that it's vitally important that there's a high quality dialogue between the inspectors and classroom teachers about the nature of practice and what excellence might look like, what good might look like, and so on and so forth. But also I think Ofsted has a key role to play in terms of leading by example, showing to leadership teams in schools how such dialogue, professional dialogue, should operate. Your thoughts, please.
Just take the question, Chris. Just to the lady in the back, and then Master.
Thanks. I'm Kate Williams from Ambitious About Autism. We're an autism education charity, and likewise, I found that really thought-provoking, and thank you. And my question comes off the back of your answer to the previous question, actually, about are we asking the right questions? I'm just wondering what your take is on whether or not we're gathering the right information about pupils with special educational needs at the moment that allow Ofsted to make a judgment about how well schools are performing for those pupils, or if we need to perhaps gather slightly different data about the progress they're making, or if we just need to use the information we've got in a different way.
Okay, so in terms of Patrick's point about the of teaching, if you look at the figures in the back of my annual report published last November, it's really stark when you look down the list. Say that it's stark for primary, but most important all for secondary. If you look at the list of outstanding schools, there's maybe 17% of them are outstanding for leadership and management. The lowest figure there, in terms of what's outstanding, is teaching, 4% for teaching. Now, you might say, well, you know, you shouldn't have a framework that was doing that. So I'll say that before you do. I think the frameworks, if you look back from 1992, they weren't wrong, they were of their time and built on different things. And I think we're now at the point where the real focus has to be on teaching. As I say, it was there in the framework that we published in 2009. You'll recall before I became an inspector, I led the teaching and learning review. And we refocused what we were doing for 2009 to make sure that inspectors spent much more time in the classroom. We're going to up that from January again. So it seems to me there's real work to be done around improving the quality of teaching. If I have a real regret from the 2009 framework, we did talk about it, but I thought it was just too much to focus on a process, that we didn't spell out the importance of continuing professional development at that time. And so this time, it really has to emerge. And I think it's really important that it emerges because given the restrictions on schools, budgets and so on, I'm really concerned that governors will look down the line and they will say that that's money that can be cut more easily than other budgets. And it's absolutely fundamental to how a school works. If it's related to the proper things. And for me, the fundamental thing would be improving the quality of teaching, looking much more forensically on its impact on learning. I would absolutely see teachers looking at teachers, supporting other teachers. You know, from the day I started, I've gone in and out of schools around the country. I went into one really early on in the north of England. The authority was chosen for me, the school was chosen for me, the head chose the classroom. I sat at the side and watched a really bright, energetic young geography teacher lose a third of the class in about minute 7. She didn't know she'd lost them. They weren't causing a fuss, they were sort of shrinking so they didn't ask a question, you know how I used to do in French. So that nobody would ask you that particular question. And she'd have been mortified to know that that was happening. If her colleague was sitting watching it and they talked about afterwards what had happened, that's actually what moves practice, absolute practice on. So the focus has to be this time on teaching and on what you can do as a school or as a community of schools actually to move teaching and learning on. Because one of the things that Ofsted reports say, that thematic reports say time and time again when we're reporting on different aspects, is that subject expertise isn't good enough. So the local authority therefore should, well, the days of the local authority providing those sorts of things have really gone, have been gone a while. And so we have to think one school can't provide good history, professional development in history and so on. So groups of schools really need to organise themselves to be able to do that. So there's a focus on the classroom, yes, and a focus on the school, but there's work to be done across schools that I also think is crucially important. Is that answering the question, Patrick?
Very helpful, thank you.
The question at the back.
Yes, I thought I'd finished. We're looking at the moment, we've said 4 areas for the school inspection framework, and then a judgment on overall effectiveness. At the same time, we picked out 2 things, spiritual, moral, social and cultural education. So that's the broad sweep of the school that inspectors will look at in those 4 areas, you know, achievement, teaching and learning, behaviour and safety, leadership and management, in those areas. But we've also said they have to make a judgment on special educational needs. So they will be doing that. But I think the sort of detailed work that you're talking about is unlikely to come out of our reports, of our school inspection reports, unless there was a special school where we were focusing on something in particular. We are using the revised version of Grades Online to have P scales in and so on, which is an advance from the last one. But the thematic reports that we do will pick up specialist areas. We don't actually have one focusing on autism, but it is something that we might actually look at over a period of time. We did a very big report last summer, we published it, on special educational needs, where we looked at issues in greater depth, and that's where we made some of those very, I think, points very effectively about the importance of breaking down barriers to learning and teaching and learning in there too.
Lady here and the West Gentleman.
My name's Sarah Griffiths. I work in corporate policy in Ealing Council, so I'm by no means an expert on any of this. But I'm just interested, a lot of work's going on with sort of community and public sector providers locally to join up services around families with lots of complex needs. So education working with social care, working with the police. And I just wondered if you could say something about the role of inspection in assessing the success of those sorts of programmes. So family intervention programmes and all those sorts of things, and whether there's any view of assessing those actually on a partnership basis rather than as part of individual different inspections.
So,
Just take this gentleman.
I'm Paul Bartier. I'm an assistant head at Wembley High Technology College. My question focuses on school leadership. I fully agree with you that the focus has to be on teaching, but from what I've seen, and it's limited to 2 schools, that really has to be driven by strong leadership within the school, really a head teacher and a leadership team that know how to bring about improvement in teaching. And my question centres around the difference in quality in leadership teams. Now, I've seen 2 leadership teams. I've been part of one presently, and I've experienced being led by another. And it was stark in the difference of quality of leadership that we had, and in terms of the expertise of the leaders of those 2 different schools. One is an outstanding school, one was a satisfactory school. And I'm thinking about the nature of bringing about improvement. Now, I have to bring about improvement in students and in teachers. Sometimes I can go into a lesson, I can give a reflective practitioner a few pointers about where they need to improve, and they can work on that themselves. More often than not, people need regular support to develop the skills to improve. And my concern is that in schools with perhaps satisfactory ratings or weaker leadership, do you feel that the leaders within those schools have the expertise to act on the recommendations that come from your Ofsted reports? I know you mentioned the website, but do you think that's enough for them to bring about the change they need to bring about to raise it to a good or an outstanding standard?
So I'll work backwards with this one. I honestly don't think the website itself will do anything. I think you need to know what you're looking for and how you want to how you want it to support your work. I do think the inspection, the process of inspection, should do something. It should leave schools stronger than before the inspection. And so what the inspectors are seeing and the recommendations they're giving should be absolutely rooted in that. Now, before 2009, we used to say things like improve teaching and learning. And actually, if the weaker schools knew how to improve teaching and learning, they'd have done it. So we try to be more specific, but inspection can only do so much. We now make sure that the school leaders, if they want to, most do, take part in are there hearing, watching, observing lessons together, and then more importantly in some ways, hearing the debate about why teaching is this or that or the other. So we do try and make the recommendations as clear as possible, and the schools heads tell me that they do build it in to the recommendations. But actually, leadership teams do have responsibility for their own development, and they do have to shape up their own development while they're looking after everybody else's. And it's really important, I think, that they model best practice in doing that. So I think leadership and management is absolutely important. I think leadership of teaching and learning is the central bit of that, and maybe over the years that got lost a bit, but I think we're coming round to seeing that that is absolutely crucial. But unless they move from a satisfactory leadership and management, the school itself won't move sufficiently quickly, I think. On the issue of what we inspect, over the next 3 years we'll be reducing inspection costs by 30%, and part of that will be on what we're looking at now in local authorities. And now we might pick up what the sorts of things that you're talking about in the inspections that we do of safeguarding or looked after children. We're more likely to pick them up in the thematic report. So we've got a report due in August on local children's safeguarding boards and the sort of interesting work that's emerging there. So they would pick up some of the things. But we are reviewing what we're doing in terms of inspection of child protection, really, or perhaps safeguarding more generally, in the light of the Monroe report. And so that will focus very much on what's described as the child's journey. That should pick up. My concern is that it must pick up the intervention programs that probably you don't see. If you really focus narrowly on child protection, you've missed what came before. And really, if areas are working really well, the programs that are there stop people coming through that system, or some children coming through that system, not all. So we hope to be picking that up through our thematic surveys. We've had education surveys and learning and skills ones for years. We're just beginning now, you may have seen them coming out, the ones on more detailed aspects of children's social care and the community dimension to much of that, because that does have a strong community dimension, but so do the schools too, and the impact of that on what's going on in schools and the system of schools across different areas.
Time for one more question. This gentleman here.
Thank you. Mazen Zeki, National Secular Society. Thank you for your interesting remarks. You didn't say anything about the role that Ofsted might play in community cohesion, and I know that community cohesion has been taken out of Ofsted's remit recently, and the government opposed a bill, an amendment to the bill which sought to restore it. So do you have any comments to make about that in the context of increasing social segregation, increasing social tensions, which are likely to be deepened by free schools and the current programme? After all, in the past, a lot of these social tensions were ignored until they erupted into riots. Many of the social tensions, of course, and many of the planned free schools are based not on education at all, but on identity. So I'd be interested in your comments.
Interesting question. Yes, we'll just take that one.
Well, I don't have a view. I will after the 1st of July, but until the 1st of July, I don't have a view on free schools because I haven't got the evidence to give you. I haven't got any evidence to give you. It's going to be a real luxury having a view without the evidence after the 1st of July. But the more serious point, community cohesion has gone or will go. It's still there at the moment until the end of the year. It will go, and it's part of the reduction to the 4 areas. And one of the real pressures on Ofsted is, this very week I've had 3 requests for things to go into the new inspection framework from January. People produce big reports, and they think to get something done, it has to be inspected by Ofsted. So I haven't worried about the disappearance of community cohesion. I do think what's happening in terms of the inspectors looking at spiritual, moral, cultural and social development of the school will pick up some of the issues that you're alluding to. The greater community dimension we would only pick up generally through our thematic reports looking at a particular aspect of education.
I'm going to ask just one question myself. Just from a there's been a bit of controversy recently, Christine, around the proposal that you've talked about around giving parents a greater say in schools, so with online assessment. How far do you think that really can go? what are the obstacles to it really being effective? What are the downsides of
it? When we introduced the 2009 framework, the issue about getting more responses from in terms of we changed the framework so that good and outstanding schools were to be inspected within 5 years and the rest every 3 years. And we were doing a form of risk assessment. At that stage, I was passionately concerned that we got parental views in there for all sorts of reasons, some cultural within Ofsted, others technical. We never did that, but for September, there absolutely will be something on the new Ofsted website, which is for parents to essentially rate their school. 10 questions in that is your child happy at school? Would you recommend this school to a friend and so on? That will be there, and we will look at it as part of the data that we look at to consider a school. It will do more than, it won't do any more than data do. It will raise questions for us. It won't give us the answers. We need to go in and look and carry out an inspection. So it absolutely is fundamental, I think, to what we're doing in January. But the remark I made, which I'm surprised nobody picked up, about the Ofsted becoming, in the long term, just essentially a commercial a contract, as it were, between school and Ofsted. You could ultimately see that, if parents were I'm just trying to see if I've got the evidence for this remark. If parents were really making the decisions about the school, that was the reason for the school carrying on in the way it was going on and so on. You could see that the school then, if you didn't have inspection, the school might then enter into an agreement about being inspected and use that report as part of their selling device, as you like. So I think it can go so far, actually, but in the real realities of today and tomorrow, I am fairly realistic about this. And when I was director in Harrow, parents complained really regularly. When I was director in Tower Hamlets, I don't think I ever got a single complaint from a parent. And I wanted them to complain. I always ran courses on parents complaining. And I want parents engaged, I want them concerned and so on, but it doesn't give you any answer about what's going on. But in my view, it's the observation and what you're seeing at the front line that really tells you the real story. But I can't overestimate the importance of parents looking at what's going on in their children's school.
Thank you for that. Thank you for answering so many great questions. Thank you all for coming along. Please help yourself to the refreshments back before you do. But let's just give Christine a round of applause.